Didn't we discuss in an episode kind of not too long ago that being afraid of lectin is full?
It is, but let me clarify why I do a lectin-free protein powder. For me, I have noticed that when I do pea protein, which has lectins in it, I get bloated. I don't feel wrecked by my health. It's not something I think that is dangerous. But for me, my body consistently responds to pea protein by bloating. And I don't like to work out and look down and go, where'd my abs go? I know my abs are there. Where are they?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul, and I'm here today with Jason Wrobel, whom you've heard quite a bit from the last 3 or 4 episodes. And he is going to be a permanent host with me now, which is such exciting news. Dotsie is still involved with the show, but the thing is that she's just so busy with the nonprofit she founded called Switch for Good, which produces this podcast, that she asked Jason and I to continue on so that she herself can keep doing the great work she's doing with Switch for Good, the nonprofit, which is like lobbying in Washington. And she speaks around the country on the importance of ditching dairy and eating a vegan diet. And she travels to support sports teams and companies that are going dairy-free and so much more. So that's why she has decided that Jason is going to come on for a while and host with me.
Now, I don't have Dotsie's flowing golden locks, nor do I have her silver Olympic medal or her incredibly white teeth. But I do have a host of knowledge as a vegan chef and someone who has been living a plant-based lifestyle for 27 years. And it's just an absolute pleasure to be going here and continuing with you, Alexandra. And for anyone listening or watching this on YouTube, Dotsie is going to pop in from time to time with updates on our programs, our projects, our big campaigns that Alexandra mentioned going on in Washington, D.C. We're doing a lot of lobbying right now to get plant-based, nutritionally equivalent milk options in the National School Lunch Program. We have some incredible things that we're doing to continue against Big Coffee to get them to drop the plant-based upcharge. So on occasion, you will be hearing from and seeing from Dotsie. And of course, if you're on our social media feeds, seeing this on YouTube or following us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., you will see Dotsie there as well, sharing all kinds of great things that we're doing at Switch for Good.
Yeah, switchforgood.org. And yeah, congratulations, Dotsie, by the way. Tim Hortons, that very, very big coffee chain, dropped their upcharge on plant-based milk. So, and they met directly with Switch for Good and Dotsie and decided to do that after the meeting with them.
Yeah, that was a big win, Alexandra. For any listeners or watchers who haven't heard, last year in the fall, we finally got word that Starbucks was dropping the plant-based milk upcharge at all U.S. locations, which was something that we were requesting and fighting for 3 years. And we had this intuition that as soon as Starbucks did it, it would have this domino effect. And certainly we've seen other coffee chains do it. Big one is Tim Hortons. They've got a huge following in Canada, big following on the East Coast here in the United States. And we are hoping and we are focusing on that perhaps Dunkin' Donuts may be next. So we're seeing the ripple effect, and we're just so happy to see this because I think it normalizes healthy plant-based milk by making it accessible and affordable.
Yeah, great. Well, that's awesome. So we have a really fun show today with, as always, wide-ranging topics. Jason's going to talk about, he's going to debunk some bro science. I'm going to go into part 2 of our weight loss and keeping it off discussion, and Jason's going to chime in there, especially with his expertise about what foods to eat that will help you stay satiated and healthy. And then we have a question from a podcast listener about a supplement called Amla. And then Jason's going to talk about whether it's important that we eat breakfast like a queen, lunch like a princess, and dinner like a pauper. Is that how it goes?
I think so. Is it true? We're going to find out here.
Exactly. So Jason, dive into some bro science and maybe even myth bust it for us.
I love this subject. I feel because, the bro science thing is something we'll catch on in the popular culture, in the realm of memetics, and it just keeps getting shared over and over and over again. And I think one of the things that we've seen, certainly in the past maybe decade, is this rampant adoption of the paleo diet. And it's this idea of we need to eat as our Paleolithic ancestors ate. That is the most natural and proper course of human consumption. And in that, there's a big emphasis on eating animal foods, eating animal flesh, because based on previous paleontological information, it was thought that early humans, early hominids, our ancestors, were big meat eaters. However, as we go into this, our ancestors were big meat eaters, bro science myth, we see some very interesting research pop up. First of which is something that we find in pnas.org. This is a scientific journal, and this was edited by some researchers at the Smithsonian Institute. So 4 researchers collaborated on this paper, and it really goes into this question of, can we properly analyze the skeletal remains of these early ancestors and see what they ate? So, we look at, okay, are plants really big drivers of human evolution? That's the question here, because I think historically we thought they haven't been. So when we look at the archaeological viability of these samples, they have analyzed the diverse taxation of starch grains, and also looking at the extraction of basalt percussive tools found at the early Middle Pliocene site of Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel. And what they found
Oh
is...
my God, wait, hold on.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Go over everybody's head, because it almost went over mine. There were too many big words there.
Yes.
They found some tools.
In
a place in Israel, and they also found what?
Well, they also have found in this, I don't know if skeletal remains were in this one. It might have been in the second one that I'm mentioning. So it looks like they analyzed tools here. Okay, so it doesn't mention skeletal. Skeletal remains was the second one that I'll get to in a second. But what they did was they found that there were a lot of starchy grains that were extracted from these tools. These were percussive tools, hammers, blades, things that they would use to crack things or split things open. And they found a pretty cool, diverse array of plant foods. They found acorns, grass grains, water chestnuts, yellow water lily rhizomes, and legumes. We talked about legumes in a previous episode. So it highlights that there are a complex array of plant foods that they were processing, and that these multi-step techniques required a lot of cognitive skills and tool-making abilities to carry out. So this is pretty cool because, it shows that these starch grains, these complex grains and these legumes preserved on these anvils and these percussive instruments show that it was a huge variety of plants that they were consuming here. So this was from hominids in Israel, at least 780,000 years ago. That's wild. That span of time, just to consider how long human life forms, or in this case, hominid ancestors, have been roaming the earth. And every time I hear those statistics, it blows my mind of like, wow, yeah, bipedal ape-like creatures have been doing this thing for a while. So it's interesting to think about, they've been doing this for, close to 1 million years. But when we also look at, okay, maybe people could say, well, that's just one area of the earth.
Right. And then wait, let me just ask you about those things. Are those acorns, are those verboten by the paleo diet? Because if I were a carnivore or paleo person, I would say, well, yeah, we know we eat vegetables in the paleo diet. We just don't eat grains, or we don't like starchy vegetables. Are those starchy?
Yeah, these are starchy grains. So I think in sort of the most staunch expression of the paleo diet, these would probably be a no-no. I don't think acorn is a big deal, because acorn is not something that I've seen paleo people eat, like acorn flour or acorn bread. But when we talk into like grass grains and things like that, I think those are a big no-no. So that's interesting to think about, throwing that on its head. But as we dive into sort of pulling the aperture back and looking at even more of our ancestors, there was some studies done by the University of Wyoming. There's a guy named Randy Haas, who's an assistant professor of anthropology. He led this study looking at ancient remains of Peruvians. Now, this is from 9,000 years ago. There's a big difference between 780,000 and 9,000 years ago. But this is interesting because 9,000 years ago in the grand scheme of things is a lot closer in time. And they talk about here with these ancient Peruvians that the evidence is showing that they had an incredibly varied diet. However, the analysis shows, as they studied the remains, the skeletal remains of people buried in the Andean Altiplano of Peru that it was 80% plant matter and 20% meat. Fascinating. And Professor Haas says conventional wisdom holds that early human economies focused on hunting, an idea that has led to a number of ultra-high protein dietary fads, such as the paleo diet. And our analysis shows it's 80-20. That's really cool. And this is interesting. He says, one way to think about it is as soon as anybody tells you that the paleo diet was the only thing, you can stop listening now. So he's really going about to debunk this. Now, he also says that they didn't eschew meat products. It just wasn't comprising the majority of their diet. So he focuses on something like an analytical technique they call mass spectrometry. And this allows them to read what people were eating at the time in the types of atoms or the types of isotopes preserved inside the skeletal remains. So he talks about nitrogen, focusing on nitrogen. And he says when you eat proteins, you're eating nitrogen, and all the nitrogen in the world comes from different flavors. So if you eat something higher up on the food chain, you keep adding on this very special form of nitrogen. And that isotope binds to bones as they grow, and scientists can read them in the skeletal remains thousands of years later. That is wild to me, that scientists are able to do this, to look at remains of people who have lived thousands of years ago and figure out what they ate. That's mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. I often tune out when I read these articles about they found some fossil and they've discovered that fossil had 10 babies and was depressed and lived here and here and here. And I'm like, how did you get that really from just the fossil? I sometimes think those scientists are extrapolating, and I don't know, but here it seems pretty clear that they ate a lot of the foods that are verboten on the paleo. Was there any coffee in there too? Because I have a little bit of a pet peeve with paleo, and that they allow coffee, and I'm pretty sure that ancient people didn't heat up water and pour coffee grains into a cup and drink it. So I always think it's funny. I think the person who invented paleo just was a coffee drinker, didn't want to give it up.
Probably.
And the
so.
butter, isn't that in paleo too? Is that in paleo or is that in keto?
That's keto. The butter, keto. The butter's a big keto thing. Yeah, okay. It sounds like in particular these Peruvian ancestors of ours were foragers, and that tubers, cousins of modern day potato, different varietals of potato, made up the bulk of their meals, which is absolutely fascinating. So they're eating a lot of potatoes. So what's clear is he's saying that people have come up with a variation of this idea called the pagan diet, which is sort of a mix of paleo and vegan philosophies they talk about. So there isn't one strict paleo diet, right? This idea of all of our ancestors across the world ate one specific way. But what is clear based on this research is that a meat-centric diet is not reflective of what people ate tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Fascinating. So instead, prehistoric populations went for whatever was around them, almost relying on a mix of hunting, but mostly gathering. Gathering was much more dependable and reliable. You always come home with something to eat. That's interesting, right? Because we think about the amount of energy it would take to hunt down something like a woolly mammoth or something that was very difficult to hunt. If you knew that there was a crop in the middle of your environment that you could go to and harvest over and over and over again, it requires it's a lot less energy intensive to go harvest something than to go hunt something. And that makes complete sense because back then, with populations being as low as we think they were, the idea of putting you or your tribe at risk of death by hunting something, if we can go pick potatoes out of the ground or get some water lilies or starch grains, less risk of death. So that makes complete sense to me.
And I learned in high school in my history books that the men did the hunting and the women did the gathering. Sounds like if it's true what you're saying, and they did a lot of gathering, the women were doing, as always, a lot of the work, 80% of the work. But becoming an agrarian society was very important. Of course, they learned how to also exploit animals, oxen, to help them with this planting and everything. So the agrarian society is not necessarily Eden for all creatures on Earth, but it did help humans.
Now, the one thing at the end of this study from University of Wyoming that it talks about is that studies on Neanderthals have shown that they ate plenty of starchy carbohydrates. Early Australian and South American populations seem to have eaten mostly plants. And it seems they are theorizing that our ancestors' diets changed with the seasons or as resources ran out, which makes sense. If they're in a cold climate and things don't grow year round, what alternative is there? They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have fermentation yet. They didn't have dehydration or food storage methods as we do in modern society. So it would make sense that as necessity predicated, they would hunt more to survive. But I think when things were thriving or they were in warmer seasons or warmer climates, looks like they ate mostly plants, which is very cool to see. So bro science debunked.
They were pegans, you're saying?
They were pegans. Yeah.
They were pegans.
Some blend of paleo and vegan.
Thank you very much. Good to know. One more, a couple more studies to point to about when someone says that we have to have meat. So, well, let me go into what we talked about last week, which was part one, from a question from a YouTuber who said, how can I lose weight effectively and keep it off long term? And so I thought it was too big a question to cover in just one episode. So last week we discussed that you have to have a calorie deficit to lose weight and that there's no tricks. And it's also important to recognize that the body fights to keep the weight on. And we also discussed how exercise can be helpful with that fight, but also not helpful with that fight when someone is restricting calories. We discussed how diet is much more important than exercise as a weight loss strategy, although you really have to exercise when you maintain your lighter weight. And we also gave some tips on how to eat healthily and stay on track. So listen to last week's episode if you want to hear more details on losing weight and keeping it off. But I'm going to just finish up this question by saying there's just never a perfect time to make a change in your life. We always think, Jason, you're nodding. We always think our life is going to be less stressed or less complicated sometime in the future. So we're going to start then. But guess what? That is just not going to happen. So I just want to encourage all of you who are thinking about getting healthier, maybe losing some weight, is that the best time is now. And we talked last week about cleaning out your cupboards and setting aside time to shop. Jason had some really good tips on that. But then there's the question of what to eat. And I'm going to ask Jason to help with this because he's a chef. But I want to start with just talking about how I think start really looking at breakfast, because it can be overwhelming if we think, oh my gosh, I've got to change everything I eat right now. Start with breakfast. It's the easiest meal, mostly because I think people's breakfasts don't vary that much. And they usually have I have one or two different things, and that's over the course of a week. Jason, you're nodding again. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm interpreting what you're saying, when you say 1 to 2 things over the course of a week, I tend to rotate between, especially breakfast, keeping it very simple. I have pretty much 3 go-to structures that I use that I'll vary, but I keep going back to the same 3 recipes, but just varying them.
Share with us those basic things that you're eating, and I'll share with you mine.
For sure. I mentioned this in a previous episode that you might remember. We talked about my morning tonic, which was my coffee substitute. And that involves basically me taking some plant-based milk. I'm really into cashew milk right now, or oat milk, whatever you want. I find that a little bit of a thicker, fattier milk helps with this, but you could use a soy milk, almond milk, whatever you want.
So what is the fattier, thicker milks? I thought soy was one of those.
Soy is, yeah. So you could do that. I like to use a thicker milk just because the consistency is nicer, as opposed to say a rice milk that's just on the thinner side. It just doesn't have the heft, the density.
Yeah. And my God, flax milk. I had flax milk once, and it tasted like, you were just chewing flax. So some people like it though. not the best flavor. So yeah, whatever plant milk of choice that you enjoy,
Take that, put it over the stovetop, warm it up, put it in my blender, my Vitamix or my Blendtec. I'll put a mix of, I mentioned there's this thing called Morning Jing that I'll put in from my friend Romania. That's black sesame, hishawu, black bean, maca. I'll throw in some cinnamon, cardamom, I'll do a little bit of coconut butter or not, depending on if you want the coconut flavor. I'll throw in a few more Chinese herbs. I'll usually do a little bit of peanut butter and a banana in there. So it's kind of a shake. It's not a smoothie. It's thin. So I'll warm that up, put it in the blender. That's like my morning coffee. And that's just my superfood start to the morning. Then I'll rotate either in a really nutrient-dense superfood smoothie. My favorite is, again, favorite plant milk. I'll do a mixture of blackberries, raspberries, and blueberries. I'll do banana. I'll do spirulina or chlorella for extra protein. I'll do hemp seeds. I'll do chia seeds, a little bit of cinnamon, maybe a handful of dates, some sprouted walnuts or almonds, and just like a real, and also my favorite protein. There's this brand called Micuna, Mikuna, that is a lectin-free, actually, I think it's from Peru. It's a Peruvian protein. And I just go for like nutrient density. So that'll be my go-to morning smoothie. But then I'll rotate.
Wait, so let me ask you something. I just heard something. You
Sure.
said lectin-free.
Yes.
Didn't we discuss in an episode kind of not too long ago that like being afraid of lectin is bullshit?
It is.
And
However,
so-
it is. But let me clarify why I do a lectin-free protein powder.
Okay.
For me, I have noticed that when I do pea protein, which has lectins in it, I get bloated. I don't feel wrecked by my health. It's not something I think that is dangerous. But for me, my body consistently responds to pea protein by bloating. And I don't like to work out and like look down and go, where'd my abs go? They're there. I know my abs are there. Where are they? So for me, I go with lectin-free protein powder. I don't eschew lectins in any other area of my life. But for whatever reason, I don't know why, Alexandra, I wish I knew, whatever processing goes on with lectin-based protein powders, my gut is like, no. We do not want this.
Okay.
So when
is it hemp or rice or what is the protein? Do you know?
It's called chocho.
You have the most complicated, like half the herbs and things you put in your coffee, quote unquote coffee, I didn't know, and now you've got a smoothie. Chocho, okay,
yeah, CHO. It's
okay.
It's a nutrient dense plant protein. It has all 9 essential amino acids, super high in fiber, calcium, and iron. It's again lectin free, super low glycemic. So chocho is it's from South America, and it is also known as chayote. So I realize this is brand new to people because there's not a lot of brands doing this. It's not a lot of people doing this, but it is super delicious, and it grows high in the Andes. So it's a lupini bean. It's a varietal of lupini called chocho. It grows high up in the Andes, and like I said, super nutrient dense, 300 milligrams of calcium per serving. I don't get bloated. It's freaking awesome. So as far as I know, I think Micuna is the only company using this for protein powder. And I just took a chance on it one day because I'm a big fan of adding protein. I eat a lot of protein in my diet. I'm really active, but I just don't want my gut to feel awful after I eat a protein shake. So I think this is the only brand in the US I've seen using chocho, this lupini bean. I would like to get my hands on the actual bean itself at some point and see how to use it, but I haven't been able to find it, probably because I don't live in the Andes and I have not been to Peru yet. So I'll add that to my smoothie. I have a big protein rich smoothie. But then the third thing I do, Alexandra, is I will make like a loaded oatmeal. I find there's a brand out there where I can get, and I'm trying to remember the name of the brand right now. It's a Canadian brand. I cannot remember the name of the package. Is it in my kitchen? Yes, and I can't read it because it's too far away. Anyway, there's a brand that makes sprouted oats, glyphosate-free, gluten-free oats. I'll do a big bowl of oats, tons of berries, sprouted walnuts, peanut butter. Those are my 3 go-tos. I do a tonic, superfood smoothie, or oatmeal. On occasion, I might do pancakes. On occasion, I might do like a chickpea omelet. But my thing is, when I get up in the morning, I want to get my day going. I'm not that guy who's going to sit for an hour making breakfast. I just don't like it. I want to get my day going.
I don't think most people do. Unless it's a Sunday and a special occasion. I don't think most people do.
Yeah. So I know some people though that they go hard on breakfast. Like they
Oh,
will
really?
go making vegan quiches and the whole thing. And I'm like, I ain't got time for that. I got stuff to do. I got a life to live. Give me a bowl of oatmeal, give me a smoothie, give me a tonic, and let me get on with my day, please. So those are my three rotate. I'm very boring when it comes to breakfast. I'm very
Oh
boring.
my God, you're boring. Okay, listen to what I have. I have overnight oats. So the night before, I take oatmeal and protein powder. I like Vega, although I did try another brand called, oh, I've forgotten it. And it was really good, but it was much more expensive than Vega, and it had a little more, like Vega seemed more natural or something. I don't know. Anyway, so it was called In Bloom and it was more expensive. So I thought I'll just stick with Vega. But anyway, oatmeal and protein powder. Then I add frozen blueberries and chia seeds and I mix it in water so that it's kind of watery. So the oats will soak it up. And then I cut some kale in small bits and put it on top, but I don't mix it in until the morning. And that's it. That's what I do. 5 ingredients, all that you can pronounce, none of them from the high Andes. So that's that. I recommend that kind of a breakfast, and you can switch. Actually, sometimes I get adventurous and I don't do blueberries. I'll do blackberries just to switch it up. So you could do flaxseed also instead, or including the chia seeds. So that's breakfast, and I think also lunch is. You have more control over lunch than you do dinner for some reason, maybe because dinner's at the end of the day, and also you tend to go out for dinner. And if you go to work, I really recommend, as I said before, taking your lunch to work if you are trying to lose weight and be healthy. So veganizing and healthifying, it's a good idea to start making your meals at home. And that includes your breakfast and lunch. And I kind of think for lunch, we have the same things also. We have sandwich, soup. Maybe I'm being too boring and you can tell me if I am not hitting all the lunch options, but basically sandwich, soup, salad, burrito, maybe a quiche over there, but and those are really easy to veganize. You just take out the meat and dairy and add tofu, beans, and some plant-based milk. Oh, I wanted to say, when you brought up all the plant-based milk stuff, audience, you need to go to switchforgood.org, to the YouTube, and I think it's under shorts, and it's Jason and Dotsie doing a taste test of all the vegan milks. And it was so awesome and very funny too, actually. You guys are very, very funny. So that was a while ago, several years ago, right, Jason?
That was a couple years back. Yeah. And we were honest. We don't want to mislead people, right? So I think we tried 10 or 12 vegan milks and just giving our honest opinion, because truth be told, a lot of them are very nutrient dense and full of macronutrients. I think a lot of plant milk companies have nailed it. Some have nailed the flavor and the texture and the mouthfeel better than others. We'll just leave it at that. You'll have to go to YouTube and see the taste test.
Right. So we'll have it in the show notes. So make it easy for you all. So Jason, do you have any quick suggestions for bringing lunch to work or eating, I guess bringing lunch to work or making it at home, and eating it at home?
Yeah,
definitely.
I've been doing, I'm a big fan of warm salads lately. This is something that I will have a bed of greens and get my greens for the week from the farmer's market. And then I'll do a blend of either barley, lentils, brown rice, quinoa, farro, whatever you prefer, some sort of warm grain. Cook that ahead of time. Stir fry that with some greens, some kale, collards. I'm a big fan of mizuna and tatsoi, whatever greens you have on hand. Putting some shiitake mushrooms in there and a protein. Like lately, I've been doing a lot of tempeh, tofu. I actually tried some lion's mane mushroom from the same company that does the fava bean tofu. So whatever your favorite plant-based protein is. And then I'll make like a dressing for 5 days. One of my favorite go-to dressings is a miso tahini sauce. You can get some water, lemon juice. If you want to do oil, you don't have to. Tahini, miso, a little bit of salt and pepper. You make a really nice thick miso tahini dressing. Put that on top. So I take the warm sort of grain and veggie mixture, put it on the cold salad greens, and then put the dressing on top. And that's really kind of my go-to lunch lately, is these really nutrient dense warm salads. They're so easy. And if you cook the grains and you saute the veggies ahead of time and the dressing, we talked about meal prep in a previous episodes, cook the grains, put them in a Tupperware, saute all the veggies, have your protein ready. Your dressing is good for about 5 or 6 days in the fridge. Then all you have to do is just assemble those things when it's lunchtime and you're ready to go. It's very, very simple. Preparation makes this all so much easier because like I said, even for me, lunchtime, I want to keep working. I'm my most active in the day. And so I find that I put more effort toward dinner than I do any other meal.
Did you know that as we age, our bodies produce less collagen? This vital protein that keeps our skin firm and supports muscles and joints starts to dwindle, leaving us with a few more laugh lines and a bit less bounce in our step. But there's good news. Yes. With vegan collagen, you can naturally replenish this essential building block and get your glow back. Through innovative extraction techniques from nutrient-rich broccoli and carrots, they've crafted 100% plant-based collagen that effectively reduces the signs of aging. It supports skin hydration, enhances joint flexibility, and strengthens hair and nails, so you can look and feel fabulous. And the best part, there are no chemicals, no preservatives, and absolutely no animal products, just pure plant-based goodness. So stay youthful, stay active, and choose Veg Collagen. Elevate your daily routine and let nature help you shine from the inside out. You're just gonna go to vegnutrition.com. That is VEDGE nutrition.com and use code S, the number 4G for 30% off. Right? You got it. One more time, vegnutrition.com and use code S4G for 30% off your order. Now back to the episode.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what sounds great to me about that is you can bring to work the leaves, the lettuce, and the bed of greens, whatever it is, and then heat up at work in the microwave the vegetable grain mix that you've made earlier, maybe on Sunday, like we talked about. Sundays is a good, and then have dressing, and you can kind of vary. Like you can have different dressing or different greens. You can have a different grain. But the basics are there, and so you don't have to think too much about what am I going to have? And is it going to be hard to eat? That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks. Well, I have some tips on how to feel more satiated with food. The great food that Jason just talked about, for example, or my overnight oats. It's something your mom probably told you, your grandmother, so it sounds corny, but eating more slowly, it's so hard, will help you feel more satiated and you can do this by chewing more each bite or putting your fork down between bites. It's about having attention to what you're doing, being really present, also paying attention to the people you're with instead of focusing on getting the food in, which is sometimes we just gobble up the food. It takes about 20 minutes for the satiety signals to reach our brain. So when we eat something too quickly, we end up eating much more than actually we need to because the 20 minutes hasn't told us, hey, you should have stopped. So slowing down, I really want to recommend, and it's not easy. It's a habit that we have to eat quickly and start with maybe just putting your fork down between bites or counting bites a little bit. And it's kind of fun, actually. You can also pay really attention to the mouthfeel of the food and appreciate what you're eating because that's going to fill you up spiritually in a way that will satisfy your soul. And so if you're an emotional eater, that really helps. Do you have thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. Just from a biological perspective, we know that amylase, which is the carbohydrate digestive enzyme in our saliva, human saliva, the more that we chew, the more we mix that amylase in with the food, which helps us to digest and therefore assimilate more nutrients from our food. So the more you chew, the more amylase you get in, the more you're going to digest and assimilate. It's awesome.
Yeah, and you'll also feel better if you have digestive issues.
Exactly. You're helping to break the food down. The mouth, right? The oral cavity is a chamber that helps to sort of pre-digest the food. That's what the amylase is for. And also, I think from the perspectives you were talking about with mindfulness and spirituality, I know that for me, one powerful practice that I endeavor to do as often as possible is before I take the first bite of food. Sometimes in a social setting, it's not possible to be fully present for every bite of food, but it's an interesting practice. But before you dive into that first bite, to just take in the aroma, the smell, like fully present with that first bite. And what I've noticed is the first few bites of food are the most satisfying. And as I continue to eat and eat and eat the meal, I will be present to the fact that it's less satisfying, that when I'm distracted, I'm on my phone and I'm catching up on basketball scores, or I'm reading, the newspaper or whatever it is. Presence and mindfulness leads to a higher enjoyment ratio of the meal. I absolutely believe that, and I've practiced that for a long time. So yeah, being present at food, putting the phone down, being with the people you're around, I love that.
Yeah. And you told me that you use food. Last week we talked about it, I think it was last week, that you're someone who uses food to distract from boredom or emotions or discomfort, situations that make you uncomfortable. So that's something, and I'm the same way, by the way. That's why we need to find something else to distract ourselves instead of food. I mean, of course we need to eat, but if we're eating because of those reasons, then maybe it's time to look for something else. And I suggest asking yourself, when you're feeling like you have feelings or you're, feelings about something that you quickly want to solve it with food, ask yourself not what should I eat, but what's eating me? And if you can really get in touch with your emotions from the day, those emotions will fill you up and you won't need food to stuff them down. And I found that out from being a bulimic and using food to stuff feelings down and then throwing it up again. And when I started feeling my feelings, I didn't have that craving to eat food like I did. And I know it's really hard, especially in the evenings. Now, the evenings are the time when mostly this happens because we're home for the day. We have time to ourselves. We are maybe a little stressed. Our willpower is kind of used up, which we talked about last week, a bit, the willpower bucket. We're often scared to feel too much that might be sad or negative. We just want to relax. But if you want to lose weight and change your eating habits, you need to give space. You need to acknowledge your feelings and accept them. And it's not easy, and it might take therapy, but let this be a starting point. It's not about like screaming or throwing or yelling or even saying, anything negative. It's like allowing yourself to just acknowledge that you have had feelings during that day that were uncomfortable and feel them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also going back to brain chemistry and our emotional health. And for me, with my struggles with emotional eating, whenever I felt sad, depressed, anxious, grieving, watching and observing myself reaching for in particular sugary foods, in researching the neurochemistry of this, we know that there was a study in the journal Cell Metabolism from the Max Planck Institute in Germany that talked about the dopamine, the neurochemicals that are released when we eat. And when we have a meal, it stimulates dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone, right? It's the dopamine is released when we scroll social media. The dopamine is released when we eat, and that it occurs at two different times. It occurs the first time the food is ingested, and then more dopamine is released when the food reaches the stomach. And without getting into necessarily the deeper nitty-gritty of this study, I just want to say that it backs this idea that if we are not feeling good about ourselves or not feeling good about our lives and our dopamine is low, we're going to reach for things that feel good. And if it's sugary food and fatty food and comfort food, as they call it in that class, we're doing it because we are deficient in a very specific neurotransmitter that we want to feel. We're wired to feel good. And the food industry knows that. If we just look at the amount of chemicals, the amount of preservatives, the amount of toxic ingredients that are in the food supply, the flavor scientists that are employed by big food to make things salty, sweet, umami, it's done because we are very easily hooked on things. Human beings we're so prone to addiction. So it makes sense. And I say this with compassion for myself and anyone who struggles with using food as an emotional crutch. A lot of that food is designed that way to accomplish specifically that, to make you feel good. So you keep going back to it. So my relationship with sugary foods continues, and it's a lot better than it used to be, but I have to be so mindful, Alexandra, of not overindulging.
Yeah, that's why I just don't have it in the house. If it's in my house, it's in my mouth. So I just want to suggest to someone next time, if you relate to what Jason and I are talking about, next time, it doesn't mean you don't have to go for that chocolate bar at the end of it, but just sit for 3 minutes quietly and just try and feel what's going on with you. And maybe that will help you. Well, it will help you in life just because you're not ignoring some very important messaging you're getting. But maybe it will help you also avoid some of the unhealthy foods you're going to that are keeping weight on. So anyway, I want to go quickly because we have a couple more things to discuss on the show, completely other topics, but I want to just make sure I touch on exercise, which we talked about last week, which was especially weightlifting. But of course, cardiovascular, moving your body is also very important for maintaining your weight loss, the weight that you've lost. And yeah, definitely go back to last week's show because we talked so much about exercise there. But I really just recommend there's no best exercise. Just if you start with walking or walk jogging because it's cheap, it's easy, you can do it anywhere with a decent pair of sneakers. And it can be fun because you can listen to this podcast, for example, or your favorite music while you're doing it. And then once you get into a routine and make it part of your life, you can start branching out into areas that are a little more uncomfortable, exercises that are a little more scary. But once you carve out that time for exercise, which is so hard for a lot of people, I would recommend, though, for those of you who say, I don't have time to exercise, and I respect that there are people who don't, who have several jobs, who are single parent raising kids, those folks, I respect that. But I think a lot of us should look at our days and see where we can carve out 30 minutes because that's the recommended minimum amount of exercise to do to maintain your weight. Do it 30 minutes a day. Look and see how much time you're spending on social media or watching TV and either exercise instead or exercise while you're in front of the TV on a treadmill or while you're walking, looking at your social media, although be careful because that can be dangerous. There are people who walk into, I guess there's been an uptick of people walking into poles and things like that or getting hit by cars because they're just not looking. They're on their phones. So very, very important, especially to keep the weight off, is to exercise. A study showed that people who exercise 30 minutes a day or 200 minutes a week, I divided it up because 200 minutes, I can't even, what does that mean? 200 minutes a week, 30 minutes a day, every day, lost much more weight than people who exercise less than that. So get at least 30 minutes. You also need to continue to write down your food. We talked about writing down food as a tip to lose weight, but to maintain it, you need to continue. And studies show that weighing yourself once a week helps people stay at their weight because it's so easy for us to fool ourselves and pretend that we haven't started slipping. Now, I don't weigh myself at all and haven't weighed myself for years because I'm just a little crazy and I look at the number and I obsess about the number. That's me. If that's you, then don't weigh yourself. But overall, I just want to say the most important thing is to have like a 250 calorie deficit, 400 calorie deficit through eating real food that has a lot of fiber and plant protein. That is sort of the overview. If that's anything you want, let's start with that. So, Jason, do you have any comments before we move on?
I pay attention to my weight, but that's because I'm trying to gain weight because I've traditionally been a person who's had trouble maintaining weight. So this could be a whole different discussion altogether. But for me, my journey has been to maintain weight and maintain muscle mass. So when I do weigh myself, I'm looking to maintain that number, to make sure that I'm staying at a target weight where I feel, strong and healthy and making sure that I'm keeping on the muscle mass. But that's my journey. That's a
So that's about
separate
muscle.
goal. Correct.
That's about muscle for you,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Not adding fat to have a higher weight.
Yeah, although that would be fun. I mean, if
it wouldn't be as healthy though.
It wouldn't be as healthy. It would be more fun though.
It would be fun. Yes, exactly. Well, I'm going to just go into, this Amla thing, I just went into so much information, and I'm wondering, maybe Jason, can we talk about what you were going to talk about dinner? And then if we go on, if we have time, I can go into the Amla, but maybe I should move it over to next week. Cause I want to not go on and on.
I mean, you could, we could keep it brief though, with the Amla. I mean, you did mention it at the beginning of the episode though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk about it. You can shut me down if I'm talking. Okay. So Leslie wrote in and asked, is Amla something I should be adding to my daily supplements? And she's a podcast listener, not a YouTuber. So when I saw this question, I said to myself, oh my gosh, Amla, I've heard of that. And then I realized that Adam Sudd, who's a 3-time guest on our podcast, episode 2, 108, and 232, he talked about taking Amla powder every day to keep his cholesterol down, and I think maybe his blood sugar. And Dr. Greger, I think, also mentioned it in episode 49, but he also definitely talks about it on his website and in his book. So for a little while, I actually was taking Amla, but I stopped because the powder tasted really bitter. But I did look into it to see if Leslie might be good for Leslie. So Amla is also called the Indian gooseberry. It's not to be confused with any other gooseberries out there. So I guess there's a lot of them. And it doesn't even look like a berry. It looks like a very large green grape, and it's crispy when you bite into it. And it's tart, very tart, which is, I guess, why the powder, which is brown, tasted bitter. And you can also take the juice too. And Dr. Greger says that Amla is one of the most antioxidant rich foods on earth. And to me, this is the reason maybe just to take Amla, because I have some things that maybe reasons people might not want to take Amla. But as antioxidants are so important because they fight the rust. Well, I learned it as oxidation is like rusting in the body. It's an aging process. And so antioxidants fight oxidation. They protect against stroke, decrease artery stiffness. They prevent blood clots from forming. They lower blood pressure, inflammation. So antioxidants are super important. And they're found mostly in fruit and vegetables. You can actually find there's a database of antioxidants in over 3,000 foods and drinks and spices and herbs and stuff. And they found that plant foods have 64 times more antioxidants in them than animal foods. And greens and berries are really high, which is why Amla is so high, because it's a berry, right? It's called gooseberry. So, and it's really inexpensive if you take your antioxidants with Amla. 1 teaspoon of gooseberry powder costs about 4 pennies and has 1,500 units of antioxidant power, which I don't know exactly how much that is, but he says that it's more than the average person gets an entire week of antioxidants.
Wow.
So, yeah, right? And also Amla, or the Indian gooseberry, in Petri dish studies against cancer, it shows that it blocks cancer cell growth and it leaves the healthy cells alone, which is amazing because chemo and radiation, one of the problems is, it might kill cancer cells, but it also kills all the good cells too. Mm-hmm. But they found that in lung, liver, cervical, breast, ovarian, and colon cancers, it would cut the growth rates in half of the cancer cells when they dripped Amla on them. And then they stopped growing at all. Wow. And then Amla began killing off the cancer so that in the end, and this was in a Petri dish, folks, 50% of the cancer cells were dead. So I don't know why I probably didn't look far enough, but I didn't see studies on humans, but you'd think they'd want to do them on humans after such an amazing studies on Petri dishes. So It sounds promising. I know there was stuff about rats and Amla, but I just try and stay away from those studies because rats are not humans. So there you go. And I don't like to promote animal testing. So, but apparently for cholesterol, and just like Adam Sood said, Amla, just 1/10 of a teaspoon of Amla a week could lower your cholesterol, as well as Zocor, which is a prescribed drug for lowering your cholesterol. And remember how inexpensive Amla is, right?
Yeah.
So could lower your cholesterol. Diabetes, it's been shown to lower blood sugar. So if you have low blood sugar, you actually shouldn't take it. And it can also help with upset stomach and diarrhea. However, you might get some hard stool from it because it's got a dehydrating effect. Some places called it a diuretic, but I also read that it has a lot of tannins in it. So this causes skin and hair dryness and constipation. So it might be the tannins. It's anti-inflammatory, as we learned, so it can really help with pain. If you're taking heart medication, you should really check with your doctor before you take any Amla. It's probably good to check your doctor before you take any new supplement. And don't take Amla if you're pregnant or nursing. I'm not sure why, but that was it. So, and so my conclusion, Leslie, is that you can try adding Amla to your diet as a daily supplement. Just based on the antioxidants, but really be careful of the doses, because it sounds like a very powerful supplement, powerful fruit. So I've read recommendations of between 1/8 of a teaspoon a day to 1 tablespoon of the powder a day, or just 1 to 2 of the actual Indian gooseberries a day. And all my research kind of inspired me to maybe start taking Amla again. But overall, I try and prefer to take as few supplements as possible. So I don't know. And it was really bitter. I did find that. Have you ever taken it, Jason?
I have. Yeah. I'm a big fan of experimenting with not only Chinese herbs, but Ayurvedic herbs as well. And I have taken Amla in the past, and you are correct. It is very bitter. I've actually tasted the Indian gooseberry whole, and it is mind-blowingly tart. I mean, just a shocking amount of vitamin C. But I find interestingly that a lot of really medicinal foods tend to be very tart or very bitter. We think about the liver protective benefits of dark leafy greens. We think about dandelions and dandelion greens. Good Lord, are they one of the most bitter things you've ever tasted in your life? But they are one of the most healthy protective foods you can have. So it's interesting that nature almost disguises or hides these extremely medicinal foods behind seemingly unpalatable flavor profiles.
It sucks, man. And how come the sugar ones aren't like, Twinkies aren't as powerful against cancer as Amla is?
It's very funny. Yeah. I think I remember adding Amla years ago when I first tried it to like coconut kefir, like to try and mask the flavor, like something that was like a bubbly, fizzy, yummy beverage. And it was fine. But taking it straight up is almost impossible to do, I think.
Well, that's what I was doing, because I didn't want to sully any food and waste like calories. So I would just put it in water, and not very much water either, just chug it down.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing
chugging
about
it down. Let's talk about what you've looked into, which is should dinner be our smallest meal?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I'll preface this by saying, like a lot of deep dives we do, there is conflicting research and conflicting studies saying different things. But let's ask this question. Is it bad for dinner to be your biggest meal of the day? Is that true? And we can dig into this New York Times article we will link to in the show notes that talks about the studies that scientists are doing on this, of like, does the time of day that you eat these big meals have anything to do with how this affects your health? So in this New York Times article, it talks about effects in blood sugar primarily. If you consume 2 identical meals, one in the morning and one in the evening, it says your blood sugar spike will be larger and stay elevated for longer after the evening meal. Says Dr. Frank Shear, who's the director of medical chronobiology at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Okay, so interesting. And when your levels of melatonin, that's a hormone that assists with sound sleep, rises an hour or two before bedtime, that actually suppresses insulin secretion from the pancreas, making it harder for your body to regulate your blood sugar. That's interesting, because I've always thought that melatonin was a good thing. I've never actually heard of melatonin suppressing insulin secretion. That's a new piece of information for me. I'm always
Well, it shouldn't matter, I guess, is the thought, because you're sleeping.
Because you're sleeping, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It says, though, if your blood sugar is frequently elevated from really big evening meals, potentially your risk of developing high blood pressure, chronic inflammation, obesity, or type 2 diabetes may rise. Interesting. And research here also considers that large meals at the end of the day or before you go to bed can increase the activity of certain metabolic pathways that lead to fat retention and fat storage while you're sleeping. Fascinating. So there was a 2022 review of 9 weight loss trials. Researchers found that the people in the study who consumed the most calories at breakfast or lunch lost more weight than those who consumed the most calories at dinner. And these people involved in the study also had better insulin, glucose, and LDL cholesterol readings.
And they were eating the same amount of calories per day.
Yeah, well, it says they consumed the most calories at breakfast or lunch. So
Okay.
I think that it was a higher caloric density at breakfast and lunch and a less caloric density at dinner. So lighter dinners. Dinner doesn't necessarily have to be the smallest meal of the day, said another doctor, Dr. Markham, involved in the study. But ideally, it shouldn't be the largest, and it's best to avoid eating really late into the evening. She suggests looking for ways to consume more of your calories during daylight hours. Okay, fascinating. So,
Okay, so yeah, I fail. I get a big F here because
Why?
not only do I like to eat late, I like to eat late, and I don't know how many calories I eat as opposed to during the day, but I think probably I might eat the most calories at dinner. Yeah. So
Same.
I have okay, they talked about the internal clock, which I get. I get that if you eat a lot at night, your body it's not processing as well. So it gets kind of sluggish, and that affects the blood sugar, which if you have high blood sugar, then you store more fat. And we see this because night shift workers, they're more prone to diabetes. Shift workers, all shift workers. So shift workers are employees who, I had to look it up and I guess I was a shift worker, work sometimes on movies because I would either work nights or early mornings but shift workers are employees who have a work schedule that's outside of the 9 to 5. And night shift workers are much more prone to diabetes because they're up at that time, and they probably, they're eating and they're not able to process their blood sugar as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mentioned at the beginning of this particular section of the podcast that we often find contradictory research studies. So as we were going into this deep dive, I found a research published in the journal Cell Metabolism that found that eating the bulk of your calories in the morning doesn't help you lose weight any more than eating those calories at night. So complete contradiction. Now, these findings were based on a controlled experiment involving 30 adults, right? It's not that big, right? 30 people, but take that for what you will, in the United Kingdom who were obese or overweight. And in the 4 weeks of the study, the participants followed one of two diets. Half of them consumed 45% of their daily calories at breakfast, followed by 35% at lunch and 20% of their calories at dinner. The other half of the participants consumed 20% at breakfast, 35 and 45 at dinner. So it was kind of the inverse of each other. The groups then switched places following the opposite regimen for another 4 weeks. Now here it talks about the nitty gritty. Both groups consumed slightly more than 1,700 calories per day. And the study...
Was that the plan, or that was just natural?
It sounds like the research...
Oh, it was in the plan, right.
The researchers often didn't provide meals to study participants. So the study offers a look at how one particular factor, the timing of their daily meal, affects metabolism and weight loss. So I don't think that was a rule per se, but maybe that was the average. It doesn't specify here. In the end, after they switched places in the second half with the regimens swapped, the researchers added up how much total weight each group lost after 4 weeks of the big breakfast diet and then the second 4 weeks of the big dinner diet. The results? They lost 7 pounds.
Wait, they lost 7 pounds when they what? Ate a bigger breakfast?
No, it was the same for each. The results came out the same for the people
they
who ate
both lost 7 each time, each week, each.
Mm-hmm.
crossover study. It's called a crossover study if the person does both sides of the experiment.
Yeah, and it shows that, the evidence points to, people did not burn more calories by eating the huge breakfast, and that there's no, magic fat burning effect, if you will, from the timing of the meals. However, the one thing they did take away, which I thought was interesting, was people said that they felt less hungry throughout the day when they consumed the big breakfast, the bulk of their calories at the beginning of the day. So this is fascinating because it throws this whole idea on its head. But if people feel less hungry throughout the day, then maybe they're postulating that as people go on, if they feel less hungry in the middle of the day, that if the study was longer term, right, that may add to greater weight loss by them not feeling super hungry in the middle of the day. That's interesting.
Right. And now remember, 1,700 calories, that's a weight loss diet for most people. I mean, it is for me. If I was eating 17, I eat about 2,000. So, and maintain that. Okay, well, that's good. I actually saw a study from Scotland, which did the same kind of thing, where they gave them either a large breakfast or a large dinner. And they found that they did lose weight with a bigger breakfast, but they felt that it was because they ended up eating less at night overall. So their overall calories were less. And they didn't think it was because the circadian rhythm then, that they just said that they had eaten properly during the day. And so they weren't as hungry at night. Because if I eat a big breakfast, I am hungry all day. So it just doesn't work for me. I know a lot of people think they're an anomaly. And I do think I'm an anomaly. I don't feel good on a big breakfast. And I'll just sort of continue eating the whole day because maybe my stomach is stretched. I don't know. What about you?
I am not a fan of a big breakfast. I'm right with you. I wake up. I'll have, as I mentioned earlier, the tonic, the smoothie, and or the oatmeal. And I'm rocketing through my day. And I think the reason is that I want to feel focused on my duties and my work and the things that I'm passionate about. And I find that if I eat too big of a breakfast, my body is focusing its energy on digestion. And I know that I don't necessarily have as much energy if my body is digesting a massive meal. And the thing I want to say too, I'm not a person who eats big portion sizes. And I think that if we focus on nutrient density and variety of macro and micronutrients in the meals we make, we don't need to eat a big volume of food. I think the misnomer, if we contrast this, I'll get on my soapbox for 2 seconds, of the standard American diet or diets that have empty calories. It's amazing to me when I go out to and I observe at, traditional restaurants, chain restaurants, the massive portion sizes. Why? Because they're devoid of essential macro and micronutrients. So of course you're going to eat a giant plate of chili cheese fries. You're going to eat a giant plate of nachos because your body isn't getting the nutrients it needs to function properly. Henceforth, it's going to keep asking for more food because there's no nutrition in it. So I think it's the inverse. I think the more that we can concentrate on highly mineralized foods, deep nutrient density, and a variety of different foods with protein, carbs, antioxidants, minerals, vitamins, we're not needing to eat big portions. So I think we flip that. So for me, I don't eat big, giant plates of food because I'm loading it with as many elements of deep nutrition as possible. So, and I find that I have more energy when I eat smaller portions, Alexandra, and I eat smaller portions more frequently throughout the day. I can go.
Well, that might be why eating a big dinner isn't great, is because your body does spend a lot of energy digesting. And so for you, during the day, that would translate into not having as much energy if it's digesting. And then sleeping, we talked last week, I think, or maybe it was the week before, about autophagy, which is the process of the cells being able to eat up all the bad cells, clean out. Basically, it's a clean out of cells while you're sleeping. And if you're busy digesting, you can't do that. So it sounds like well, I should ask you, Jason, what's your takeaway from this article?
I mean, my takeaway is that, again, there are so many studies, observational studies, that we can extract this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And I think it's very easy for us in the health and wellness field to categorize things in absolutes. I think the ultimate barometer here is being very attentive to how you feel in terms of your energy, your weight, your motivation throughout the day, and also making sure that, as you said earlier, if you are on a weight loss journey or you're on a health journey of any kind or a healing journey, to have health professionals in your corner to monitor things like your blood sugar levels, your glucose, all, getting your blood panels tested. I think ultimately it's very easy for us as armchair theorists and analyzers to look at studies and go, that's the truth. But we know how many studies and how much research that in a few years can be debunked by new research that comes out. It's a moving target. So ultimately, I think this comes down to the individual journey of each of us, what works well for our bodies, and knowing that as we age and as we evolve, something that may have worked well for us 10 years ago is not the most relevant choice of food or exercise or wellness for us now. And I can say that with confidence. At this age, I'm eating very differently than I did in my teens, in my 20s, and my 30s. And I do that because I'm a life experimentalist. I love trying new foods. I love trying new exercises. I love trying new wellness routines. And I'm the guy that's going to constantly tweak those dials to see what works now. So my take on this is each one of us have to be willing to evolve and be open to what works in this moment and not being attached to this research as gospel, or I'm going to do things the same way I did 10 years ago. We have to be open to the moment and what works for us now and experiment with what that is. That's my advice. That's how I do things.
I'm with you. I think it's good to know the science and different studies, but what's most important is how you feel and what your blood tests are saying and how your body's reacting. So I remember when I was a health coach, I worked with a gentleman who'd lost like a 90 pounds with Weight Watchers. And they count points and things, I guess. I'm not really sure how it works, but he had a habit, which during his weight loss journey, he continued of eating at midnight. He would or 2 a.m. He would wake up, go downstairs and eat something, not a ton as I recall, but he would have something like an apple or two, or I can't really remember, but he always ate. And I asked him, because I thought this doesn't sound healthy and you should not eat at night at 2 a.m. And he would not change because it had worked for him for his weight loss journey. And now was a year and still maintaining it. And it worked for him. And so, hey, you know what? If it works for you, go for it. So, I think he's a good example of someone who's he liked it. He said, no, I'm going to continue eating in the middle of the night. And because it works.
That's it. That's really the thing that we want to leave you with, audience, is be relentless in your experimentation, keep a journal, find out what works for you. And when it doesn't work anymore, be willing to experiment and let go and try something new. And I think that's a lot of life, right? It's not just our health and our wellness and our well-being journey. It's when something ain't working, you got to be willing to let go and invite the new thing in. So with all of that, we appreciate you joining us here for the Switch for Good podcast. If you want more information on recipes, research, resources to help you thrive on a dairy-free and plant-based lifestyle journey, we've got you. You can go to switchforgood.org. You can find us on all the social media platforms, as I mentioned, YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're all over the place with the latest and the greatest to help you feel amazing on your journey. Alexandra, always good to see you. And thanks for joining us again here on the Switch for Good podcast.
Yay. And everybody, just one last thing. Check the show notes to look for Jason and Dotsie taste testing all those milks. They're so funny and educational too. You wouldn't have thought there'd be so many different plant milks out there, but there are.
We like to have fun.